Olá, pessoal, boa tarde. A gente está aqui começando as palestras da parte da tarde, e aqui temos uma convidada muito especial também, que é a professora Ana Maria Martins. Como o Jairo falou mais cedo, uma grande amiga do Jairo, amiga da Ruth. E Ana Maria é também, para mim, uma pessoa muito querida. Eu já ouvia falar da Ana pela Ilza, né, aqui na Bahia. Quando eu fui para o doutorado, eu conheci a Ana, que estava na banca da Krishna Miúti, e a gente pôde se conhecer lá em Campinas. E, para mim, que trabalho com história da língua, a Ana tem trabalhos importantíssimos na história do português, com os quais eu pude aprender muito para fazer minhas pesquisas sobre a história do espanhol. E a Ana também, além de trabalhar com história da língua portuguesa, tem uma produção enorme sobre reflexões teóricas sobre o português contemporâneo, que vão dialogar, né, nessa discussão tão relevante do português brasileiro, português europeu, que nesse diálogo com o Jairo vão contribuir tanto para a linguística teórica, né? Então, é um prazer enorme receber a Ana Maria aqui e ouvir um pouquinho do que a Ana tem pensado nas suas longas, né, reflexões linguísticas. Muito obrigado, Ana. Apesar do fuso horário que a gente tem da distância, você ter disponibilizado um pouquinho do seu tempo para compartilhar conosco e comemorar com a gente aqui a festa em homenagem ao Jairo e à Ruth.
Muito obrigada, Carlos. Eu começo por agradecer o convite para participar neste quarto encontro de gramática federativa, que tem um programa tão interessante, e fiquei muito feliz por poder participar num encontro de homenagem ao Jairo e à Ruth, duas pessoas por quem eu tenho enorme admiração e estima. O Jairo é um grande amigo desde que nos conhecemos na Universidade de Maryland, ele como doutorando da Universidade de Maryland, eu como doutoranda visitante, e como ele já disse hoje de manhã, graças aos bons ofícios da Mary, mais tarde tornámos-nos também companheiros de trabalho, e tem sido também uma experiência, como vocês brasileiros dizem, muito prazerosa, com muito bons resultados, e tenho aprendido imenso com o Jairo. Mas não me vou alargar nestes comentários, não é? Porque o tempo voa e tenho aqui uma comunicação para apresentar. E então vou passar para o inglês. I will be talking about the pronouns a gente and vocês that are very familiar to all of us. These giving you... Carlos, it's not working. What is going on?
Oi, Ana.
Não está a passar. E eu tenho no modo leitura.
Você tem que apertar a setinha normal para passar para baixo. Veja aí.
É o que eu estou a fazer. Estou a apertar a setinha, mas não está a passar. Ou será que são estas setinhas? Não.
Você tem que ir abrir sua tela no PowerPoint, não na tela do StreamYard. Você tem que abrir a tela do PowerPoint.
Então vou parar a partilha e
tentar... Não, Ana. Você tem que ficar com o PowerPoint aberto na sua tela, entendeu? Não o StreamYard. Você tem que falar com o PowerPoint na sua frente.
Sim. Estou a fazer tudo outra vez como fiz no início, para ver se... Mas porquê que agora não aparece? Vamos lá abrir. Agora já deve funcionar. Vamos. Já está.
Apareceu para mim aqui seu fundo todo aqui, não o PowerPoint.
Mas eu estou a ver o PowerPoint.
Não, cancela o compartilhamento.
Parar partilha.
Isso, aí você vai apresentar, compartilha a tela.
Então, o que é que eu faço agora? Fecho isto tudo. Fecho. É porque eu fiz agora exatamente isso. Fui a apresentar, compartilhar tela.
Aí você
Agora,
escolhe janela,
outra vez compartilhar tela. Agora, janela.
E escolhe o PowerPoint.
Mas agora o PowerPoint não me aparece. Então, se calhar tenho de ir abrir o PowerPoint. Ele estava aberto e eu fechei-o.
Deve ter fechado.
Por que eu não vejo o PowerPoint? Ai, fazer tudo outra vez de novo. Apresentar, compartilhar tela, compartilhar, janela. Mas agora, quando escolho janela, não me aparece o PowerPoint.
Você está com ele aberto aí na sua tela?
Eu estou com ele aberto. E, no entanto, ele não está a aparecer.
Você quer me mandar e eu passo para você?
Ah, espera. Eu acho que agora vai aparecer. E agora, apareceu?
Apareceu, pronto.
E agora ponha em modo de leitura, não é?
Modo de leitura.
Vista de leitura, é este aqui.
Isso, fica nele.
Pronto,
Vê se passa agora.
Pronto. E agora está a funcionar para vocês?
Passou,
Pronto.
funcionou.
Pronto, peço imensa desculpa.
Não, que isso.
Okay, so I will be talking about these two pronominal innovations in European Portuguese dialects. These two pronouns are traditionally thought to display a mismatch between semantic and morphological features. But in this presentation, I will show that the morphological underspecification analysis of a gente, as proposed in Martins e Nunes 2021, and the book by Cato Martins e Nunes that Jairo talked about this morning, accounts better for the set of data offered by the Cordialcine corpus, a corpus of European Portuguese dialects, than a feature mismatch analysis like the one I will specifically compare with the analysis proposed by Costa and Pereira in 2003, João Costa and Sandra Pereira. I will then extend the morphological underspecification approach to deal with the pronoun vocês in a particular dialect, and will show that these new dialectal data support the correlation between underspecification, morphological underspecification, variable subject-verb agreement, and non-licensing or marginal licensing of null subjects. Okay, this is the set of locations that constitute the Cordialcine corpus, and as you see, these locations are spread throughout the Portuguese territory, continental and islands. Okay, so here you see the distribution and relative frequency of the pronouns a gente and nós in this corpus. And as you can see, the innovation agent is spread across the Portuguese territory. It is everywhere. And not only it is everywhere, but it is generally more frequent than the earlier pronoun nós. In fact, in all the places where you see the dark blue rhombi, it has very high frequency, above 85%, and there are even 4 locations where nós is not attested. Nós only has a higher frequency than a gente in the 3 points marked with the red rhombi in the extreme north of Portugal. So a gente displays 3 patterns of subject-verb agreement. Two of them, the ones exemplified in 1 and 2, are well known since very long. But the third one was really uncovered by this corpus and had not previously been identified in the literature. So we can have sentences like a gente trabalha muito, which are usually thought to show the verb in third singular, although I will later say that's not the case. Sentences like tu, a gente trabalhamos muito, where agreement is in first person plural, as we see by the person number morpheme on the verb. And then the corpus showed a third pattern that corresponds to a gente trabalham muito, and apparently here the agreement is in third person plural, but again I will later say that in fact it's just plural, not third person. Here you have some examples taken from the corpus that show that the three patterns can be found in the same dialect and even in the speech of the same person. In this case, that's a woman from São Miguel. She says, a gente trabalhava muito pelas terras, mas a minha mãe sempre nos deixou aprender aquilo que a gente desejavam, tanto eu como as minhas irmãs. The context is important here because it shows that a gente is not used here as a sort of impersonal pronoun, but really as a referential pronoun, first person plural pronoun. And then in 5, primeiro a gente temos uma ordedeira de onde a gente levam. So here you see the alternation between first plural and just plural. And in 6, a gente, quando temos aqui a manta já muito para cima, a gente tem que tirar uma tirada, a gente vem aqui, a gente tiram. Ou agora está baixinho, a gente tiram. And here the alternation between the three different patterns. Here you see the distribution of the different patterns of agreement. The pattern where you don't see any morphology on the verb, like a gente gostava, is everywhere, and it is considered the standard pattern. Where variation shows up is on the other patterns. So this pattern is everywhere, and which other patterns appear. So first concentrate on the difference between the rhombi and the stars. The places where you have a rhombi are the places that exclude a gente gostávamos. That is, that exclude agreement in first person plural. While in all the places where you have stars, this pattern is allowed. It's very much everywhere, and it is the north of Portugal and some inland locations that do not allow it. Now, if we look at the rhombi, the two blue ones mark two locations where, in tandem with the pattern a gente gostava, we also find a gente gostavam. Although this pattern is rare there, meaning that it shows very low frequency. Looking at the stars, where you have a red star, you have the standard pattern along with the pattern with agreement in first person plural, a gente gostava, a gente gostávamos. Where you have a blue star, you have the three patterns. What distinguishes the dark blue star from the others is that in this dialect, which is specifically the dialect of the island of São Miguel in Açores, the pattern a gente gostavam is dominant. It is rare in all the other locations. That is, it has very low frequency in the other locations, but it is the pattern showing higher frequency here, around 60%. Now, if we look at sentences that also include a secondary predicate, let's see what happens. So let's first look at sentences 7 to 10. Here, the finite verb is always in the apparent third person plural, third person singular form. then the secondary predicate can be in singular, like in 7 and 8, a gente fica cansada, a gente fica cansado, or can be in plural, like in 9 and 10, a gente fica cansadas, a gente fica cansados. When the verb is, when the finite verb is inflected in plural, you can only have the pattern in 13 and 14. A gente ficamos ou ficam cansadas, a gente ficamos ou ficam cansados. And the pattern where you have plural in the finite verb and singular in the secondary predicate is out, is excluded, is not attested, and is judged as ungrammatical by all speakers. Okay, so this summarizes the data. If you have zero agreement morphology on main verb and on secondary predicate, that's okay. If you have zero agreement morphology on main verb and plural in the secondary predicate, that's okay. Plural is also okay, but plural in the main verb and zero in the secondary predicate is out. So Costin Martin and Pereira, in a paper presented in 2013, propose an analysis that is based on the idea of feature mismatch. And what they propose is that morphological agreement must be local. So if agreement is not local, it can't be morphological, it must be semantic. For them, they propose the structure in 15, and for them, the small clause is a phase, and that means that agreement between the subject and the secondary predicate cannot be morphological because that cannot happen across a phase boundary. So the regular pattern, the expected pattern, let's say, for them is the pattern in 15 prime, a gente fica cansadas, where the finite verb is for them in third person singular because it is morphological agreement, while the secondary predicate is in plural because it displays semantic agreement. Then the problem is how to explain the other patterns besides the one they explain as their central proposal. So to explain the pattern where you have plural in both the finite verb and the secondary predicate, like a gente ficamos cansadas, they adopt a proposal by Taylor 2009, who in fact considers that a gente is not a pronoun. They don't adopt this part of the analysis of Taylor's analysis, but they adopt the idea that when you have a gente ficamos with agreement in first person plural, in fact, a gente is in a position to a null pronoun nós. So they propose the structure in 16. This nós is null, a gente is adjoined to this null nós pronoun, and that's why you see agreement in first person plural, because it is agreement with the null counterpart of nós, not really agreement with a gente. Okay, so what are the problems with this proposal? First, it does not explain the pattern with singular, or that is without agreement morphology, visible agreement morphology on the verb, neither on the secondary predicate. Second, the analysis does not derive agreement in what appears to be third person plural, like a gente gostam. And also it it doesn't fit well with the geolinguistic data, because the north and inland area where nos, the pronoun nos, and its null counterpart is more frequent, is exactly where the pattern with agreement in first person plural is excluded. And this is not expected under Costa and Pereira analysis, since they propose that you have that agreement pattern when you have a gente joined to a null nos. And finally, they cannot account for sentences like the ones in 18 and 19 that also appear in the corpus. So sentences like a gente casamos-se novos, or a gente habituaram-se. And what is unexpected here is that you have agreement in plural, verbal agreement in plural, but the reflexive pronoun, instead of being the first person plural nos, is the third person, what appears to be the third person singular se. In fact, Costa and Pereira explicitly say that these sentences are not possible. They are ungrammatical, and they use that as an argument in support of their analysis. And that's true that these sentences are ungrammatical in most dialects, but not in all dialects. Some dialects permit them. Okay, so I will now propose a different approach to these variable agreement facts related to the pronoun gente. And the proposal I'm going to put forward is based on the idea developed in these works with Jairo Nunes and Mary Cato, that feature mismatch between semantics and morphology, in fact, does not exist in the pronominal system. So I'm going to show what is the characterization of the pronominal and agreement systems that is proposed for Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese, discarding these mismatches, and showing that the same phonological exponent can be the realization of different morphological specifications. In order to have this characterization of the pronominal system without mismatches, we use the notion of underspecification on the morphology level. This approach, we are going to see, permits to explain, for example, why in Brazilian Portuguese null subjects display different degrees of acceptability depending on the pronoun that is dropped. And also explain why in European Portuguese, which is a consistent null subject language, the null counterpart of the pronoun agente is not licensed. Here you have some examples of sentences with null subjects. And you can see, looking first at Brazilian Portuguese, that different pronouns lead to different results when we are dealing with their null counterparts. So, for example, 20A, displaying the null counterpart of the pronoun nós, is okay in Brazilian Portuguese, quem devíamos contratar, while the null counterpart of the pronoun eu in 20B results in a marginal sentence. And the null counterpart of the pronouns você or ele in 20C results in ungrammaticality. So it's not the case that it's just grammatical and grammatical, but there are different degrees depending on the pronoun. On the other hand, when you look at 20D, now we see that here Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese agree with each other, differently from all the other cases where all sentences with null subjects are okay in European Portuguese, but not with agent. And we want to understand why. We could think that the null counterpart of agent is not possible in European Portuguese because on the one hand, there is no visible agreement morphology on the verb, and on the other hand, there is this feature mismatch there would be this feature mismatch between morphology and semantics, which would not permit to interpret the null subject. But that cannot be the case, because as you see in 21, eles pensam que não quer reclamar. In European Portuguese, this sentence is grammatical and perfect. B, the null subject interpreted as ele, the third singular pronoun, or as você, the second person singular pronoun. And você is just like a gente that is traditionally is also sought to display feature mismatch between semantics and morphology. Okay, so this is the characterization of the pronominal system that is proposed. And as you can see, there are no feature mismatches between semantic specifications and morphological specifications for person or number. Let's look at a gente and vocês. So what you see for a gente is that it is specified as first person and number plural with respect to semantic specifications. And what happens with morphology is that there are no specifications for person and number. So this is not a mismatch. It's just that semantics specify the values for person and number, and morphology doesn't. So what happens when there is agreement between tense and the pronominal subject, the nominative subject, what happens is that the person and the 5 features on tense are going to rest unvalued. And this is why in Cato, Martins, and Nunes' proposal, this is why the null subject cannot be licensed. On the other hand, for example, if you look at vocês, so you have semantic specifications for person and number, second person number plural. In European Portuguese, the morphological specifications are similar, so identical matrices for semantic specifications and morphological ones. But for example, in Brazilian Portuguese, not, because now person does not have a specification. This means that under agreement between tense and the nominative subject, the person feature of tense will stay unvalued. Only the number feature will get a value, and that's why sentence with the null counterpart of vocês will be marginal in Brazilian Portuguese. So the general idea, I can't go into details because that's not the goal of this paper, but the general idea is that a null subject will be licensed if the 5 features of tense get fully valued, or if the person feature gets a value. If only the number feature gets a value, we will have a marginal sentence, and if none of the 5 feature gets a value, you will have an ungrammatical sentence. This table also show us that different morphological matrices may correspond to a similar verbal form. So, for example, trabalha, without any overt person number morphology on the verb, can correspond to matrix is fully specified or unspecified, and can also correspond to a fully specified matrix like the matrix of morphological matrix of você in European Portuguese, which is second singular, or to the morphological matrix of ele, which is third singular. So we need to consider here also what are the correspondence rules for the realization of these underlying matrices when they are transformed in phonological exponents. And so here are the correspondence rules that again are proposed in the works I'm referring to. And as you see, let's look at European Portuguese, is what is relevant here. As you see, the final nasal that we find in the verbal forms of third person plural is in fact just under this proposal is in fact just a morpheme corresponding to plural, not corresponding to third plural. And that's why it can appear in agreement configurations where the subject pronoun is eles, elas, as it appears with vocês, because it's just plural. And why can it be just plural? Because, as you can see here, in some cases, the person number features are fused, like it happened with first person singular or second person singular or first person plural here. But in other cases, as it happens with the third person pronouns or with the você, vocês pronouns, the person and number features are not fused. They are dissociated. So you can have a value for one of them and not the other. Okay, so this means that when we have a gente trabalham, what we have there is agreement in plural, is not agreement in third person plural. Also, when there are no overt morphological marking on the verb, this is just the elsewhere rule that can correspond to diverse morphological matrices and not necessarily the third person singular, as you can see here, right? All these corresponds to the same phonological exponent. Okay, so when we have a gente trabalhamos muito, we in fact have agreement in first person plural. When we have a gente trabalham muito, this is agreement in plural, and that's it. And a gente trabalha muito is agreement with no specification, without any specification of values for person and number. So there is no mismatch in person features and no third person agreement, singular or plural, with a gente. Okay, so under this under specification perspective, how would we account for the variable agreement patterns with a gente? This is what I have to propose, and what you find here are descriptive generalizations for which at this point I don't really have theoretical motivation. So I would say that subject-verb agreement can activate semantic features when the morphological person number features of the subject pronoun are underspecified. And this accounts for the pattern, a gente ficamos cansadas, but this possibility of semantic agreement is subject to dialectal variation. Not all dialects allow it, while morphological agreement is everywhere. Second, the activation of semantic features can be total in person and number, or partial number only. This is also subject to dialectal variation. So dialects that allow semantic agreement may allow both options, total or partial, or only one of them. And these accounts for the pattern, a gente ficam cansadas, where what you see in the finite form of the verb is just a verbal morpheme for plural and not first person plural. Third, when semantic subject-verb agreement is activated, it necessarily extends to agreement with secondary predicates. And these accounts for the ungrammaticality of a gente ficamos cansada. On the other hand, fourth, morphological subject-verb agreement does not bar the availability of semantic agreement with secondary predicates, and this accounts for the other two patterns, a gente fica cansadas, or the pattern a gente fica cansada, that was not derived by under Costa and Pereira analysis. With respect to these generalizations in 3 and 4, maybe we can think that semantic agreement applies to representations and can only target syntactic constituents. So either it applies to the small clause or to the whole sentence, but cannot apply to just subject-verb agreement because that's not a syntactic constituent. But this is just an hypothesis. Okay, so when you have a gente trabalha muito, this is morphological agreement. A gente trabalhamos muito with semantic agreement total in person and number. A gente trabalham muito is again semantic agreement, but partial, only number. Morphological agreement is general. Semantic agreement is subject to dialectal variation and may not surface or be marginal in more conservative dialects. And that's why it is in the Norse dialects that we have this area that does not allow a gente trabalhamos muito with total semantic agreement and very few instances of partial semantic agreement. Okay, now, having this in mind, let's see what is new in the cordial scene data with respect to the pronoun vocês. Like a gente, vocês is also an innovation that spread across all the Portuguese territory. It is everywhere, almost everywhere. Only the 2 locations marked with red rhombi only have attestations of voz in the corpus. And then also not many locations have still voz as a possible option in tandem with vocês. In most places, the blue rhombi, there is only vocês nowadays. Note that it is again the North that is more conservative, although here the coastal area of the North is already excluded for this more conservative dialect. And the violet rhombus in Açores, isn't really relevant because it appears in the context of oral tradition storytelling and corresponds to direct speech. This other map shows us which are the dialects that still preserve a morpheme, a verbal morpheme for second person plural. And these are the places where you have the violet rhombi. In all these places, the second person plural coexists with just plural to express the second person plural. In the locations marked in blue, only the plural form, gostam, is attested. Gostais is excluded. Now, there is a specificity of that location that is identified with the yellow line around it, and that's the following. So in the places where you still have specific morphology for second person plural, you can have a null subject, so something like gostais, or an overt pronoun where it exists, so it will be vós gostais. This means that vós always goes with a verbal form like gostais. And vocês usually goes with a verbal form with just plural morphology. So vocês gostam or just gostam if you have a null subject. But in that particular place, which is a location called Kovu, what is interesting is that the pronoun vocês shows variation in its agreement, subject-verb agreement pattern, because there you can have vocês gostam, just gostam, with a null subject, second person plural, or also vocês gostais, with the verb in second person plural. Okay, so in this dialect, you can have both 24 and 25, vocês ficam cansadas, or vocês ficais cansadas. Let's just look at examples 26 and 27, which are produced by the same person, the same informant, in the same discourse fragment. So it says, olhai lá, que é que vocês andam a fazer? And here we have the type of agreement that we find in the standard Portuguese, so just plural on the verb, but in 27 you have vocês andais a gastar dinheiro, and here agreement is in second person plural. So how can we explain these difference? We can explain it under, again, the notion of under specification. So the idea is that you will only find these agreement alternations if we have a pronoun that is in partially or totally underspecified, and being underspecified allows semantic agreement. Note that in this dialect, like in all the dialects that still have a specific morpheme for second person plural, the correspondence rules for the morphological realization of verbal agreement include one more rule, that is this rule that says that second person plural with fused features corresponds to this morpheme. Okay, so what is the analysis I'm proposing here? I'm proposing that in this particular dialect of Kovu, maybe other dialects that haven't been yet identified, the person feature of vocês does not have a value. Only the number feature has a value. So this is the morphological matrix, of course. And because you have this under specification, then semantic agreement can be activated. So when you have morphological agreement, we'll have vocês gostam, like in standard Portuguese, but semantic agreement will allow vocês gostais in this dialect. Also note that this is only made visible because this dialect preserved morphology, specific morphology for second person plural. Because if a dialect has a morphological matrix for vocês like this one, but does not have a specific morpheme for second person plural, the possibility of semantic agreement would still be invisible, right? Because it couldn't be expressed by a particular morpheme. Okay, so we can now think if this kind of analysis for the behavior of vocês in this specific dialect is better than an analysis of the in the style of Costa and Pereira, 2013. In their style of analysis, the facts would be explained by saying that in this dialect, vocês can be an apposition. It can be adjoined to a null voz, and that's why you get vocês gostais. But then we can ask, well, so why can't we also have, for example, thinking of the second person singular pronouns, why can't we have a você adjoined to a tu, resulting with in a agreement overtly in second person singular, which is marked with a final S in European Portuguese, and that is impossible, is not attested anywhere. But there is, I think, a more interesting way of supporting the underspecification analysis for vocês in this dialect. And this is the fact that proposing this matrix with an unspecified, with underspecification for the feature person, we are doing the prediction that in this dialect, the null counterpart of vocês, a null subject corresponding to vocês, should be marginal, right? Because this matrix is just the same than the matrix proposed for Brazilian Portuguese with respect to the pronoun vocês, and we saw that it results in marginality when we have sentences with the null counterpart of vocês. So let's see if this prediction is borne out or not. And here we have quantitative data. They are extracted from a master thesis by this author who studied the data, all the data of the Cortelcine corpus for the expression of second person plural. So if we start by looking at the last line, so the total numbers, we see that in Kovu, there is a lower rate of null subjects corresponding to second person plural than in all the other locations of Cortelcine, both if we compare with the global percentage of null second person plural null subjects, or we compare just with the area where second plural morphology is still available. On the other hand, if we look at the second line, even if we restrict to the cases where you have verbal inflection marked with just plural, we also see this difference between Kovu and the other areas, here still more marked. And if we only look to the Kovu data, so the last column, you see that in most cases, a second person plural null subject in Kovu is marked with first person plural morphology and not just with plural. That is usually the null option for second person plural is the null counterpart of vós, not the null counterpart of vocês. So it seems that the prediction is in the right direction, although the number of data we have is not as high as we would like. If we look at the specific examples where we have a null subject that is the null counterpart of vocês, the 8 attestations, we see that 3 of them appear in coordinate structures, so they are irrelevant because in coordinate structures also the pronoun agent can be deleted, and this happens even in languages that are not non-null subject languages. So we are left with 5 examples, and 3 of these appear in imperative sentences, the ones in 33, A to C. Chega lá, ouçam, diz assim, venham para dentro, comam moras. And in these cases, also with, these are subjunctive forms with imperative meaning. And in these cases, we could have null subjects also in a non-null subject language. And the other 2 sentences are the ones in 32, and they are both what Obenauer calls special interrogatives, that is non-information seeking interrogatives. These are of a special kind, involve a special kind of illocutionary force that could be here allowing for the null subjects. So although we don't have a big quantity of data, the data seem to point to the fact that we have this correlation in Kovo between having pronoun vocês that is morphologically partially underspecified and at the same time gives marginal results when it is deleted, giving rise to a null subject. I put here again these maps just to tell you that, okay, this is
Ana, 5 minutos, tá?
Carlos, terminei o meu tempo. Carlos, estás a ouvir-me?
5 minutos.
Pronto, então ainda vou acabar antes do tempo, estava aqui a correr. Então, só para vos dizer que neste mapa, agora passei para português. So, in this map, the violet rhombus here in between these 2 blue ones is Kovo, this particular dialect where vocês can show different agreement patterns. And it could be the case that in other dialects around here, vocês is also underspecified for its person feature, but in these 2 locations, that wouldn't be visible because in these 2 locations, second person plural morphology was lost, okay? So here, even if it was semantic agreement, it could not be overtly expressed as second person plural. And with respect to other places, it could be that these other places do not allow a semantic agreement, because remember that with gente, we saw that is in an area, in a northern and inland area, that agreement in first person plural, a gente ficamos or a gente gostamos, is not possible. So a way of testing whether there are other locations where maybe vocês is underspecified would be to see the rates of null subjects corresponding to vocês arising in these other locations. This is something I haven't done, but it is a way to test whether this can happen. We can ask why in this dialect vocês would be underspecified. My idea is that, well, it's very clear from the maps that both innovations, that is the expansion of a gente and the expansion of vocês, starts from the south. They are south innovations that that extend towards the north and the islands. That's why the northern areas are the ones showing some resistance to the innovation. So if we think that the innovation arose later to the north, we can think that maybe under-specification is part of the transition process that took these pronouns from being full DPs to becoming pronouns. So maybe what happens is that at a certain stage, these former DPs lose their original features as DPs and go through a stage of under-specification before becoming fully specified pronouns. So for me, this would make sense in a diachronic perspective, but again, it's just a suggestion, a hypothesis. Okay, so to conclude, what I have proposed here is that apparent agreement mismatches in person number features are a side effect of morphological under-specification of certain pronouns, as proposed under-specification as proposed in these works that I referred earlier. Second, variation in the overt manifestation of agreement patterns across dialects and within a dialect or grammar depends on, first, whether semantic agreement, partial or total, is allowed or not, and second, the specific correspondence rules for the morphological realization of verbal agreement inflection. For example, even if allowed, semantic agreement will be invisible in a dialect with underspecified vocês, but without second person plural verbal inflection. And third, the correlation between variable agreement and null licensing or marginal licensing of null subjects displayed by European Portuguese gente and dialectal vocês support the proposed analysis against a feature mismatch approach. That's it. Thank you very much. What should I do now, Carlos?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Ana Maria. Obrigado, Ana Maria, pela sua fala interessantíssima. O chat aqui está fervilhando de debate. Vou começar a mostrar para você o que os colegas estão aqui debatendo com a sua fala. Vamos lá. A Ruth, né? Que saudade, Ana Maria. E aí começa a Alba, né? A Alba Gibrail também. Boa tarde, Ana Maria. A Alba, claro, tópico da Charlotte. E aí a Eugênia, comentários, né? Então.
Carlos, devo deixar de partilhar a tela para vos ver?
Não entendi.
Devo parar a partilha para vos poder ver?
Eles não aparecem. Você agora só vai ver os comentários que eu compartilhar aqui. Eles não aparecem.
Está bem.
Você pode ver a gente aqui no StreamYard. Você me vê?
Pronto, agora reduzi aqui o PowerPoint e agora vejo-te, sim, Carlos.
Isso, aí você vê os comentários aqui. Então, eu vou passar aqui a Ruth. Que saudade, Ana Maria.
Bem, Ruth. E eu não disse no início, mas queria dizer agora porque disse que estava muito feliz por participar nesta homenagem ao Jairo e à Ruth, duas pessoas de quem gosto muito, mas queria também deixar aqui a minha homenagem à Ilza, que é uma pessoa tão especial para mim, que eu tive a sorte e o prazer de conhecer, e como o Carlos disse de manhã, eu acho que ela de algum modo está aqui connosco, portanto é uma pessoa por quem sinto um enorme afeto e que tenho muita pena que não possa estar aqui connosco, mas de alguma maneira está no nosso pensamento.
A Alba, né? E
Oi, Alba.
A Eugênia, com esses comentários, né? A gente não nega a sua origem nominal.
Uhum. Mas não é propriamente uma pergunta, não é, Eugênia?
A Cristina Schmidt pergunta o que acontece com a gente em posição pós-verbal.
Não. Em posição pós-verbal não há diferença entre a posição pós-verbal e pré-verbal em relação à questão dos padrões de concordância, nem à interpretação. Chegou a gente, pode ter interpretação pronominal também. Não tem de ter uma interpretação nominal. Aliás, a gente com a interpretação nominal, eu penso que hoje em dia, no português contemporâneo, é raríssimo.
O Andrés comenta alguma coisa, né, que tem teoria
Again, it's like Christina's question. With the data from Cortelsina have analyzed, I don't see any relevant differences between the pre-verbal and post-verbal position with respect to the agreement patterns I have discussed and the interpretations of gente as a pronoun.
A Eugênia fala mais alguma coisa sobre a gramaticalização do agente em Portugal.
Não, a gente, claro que existe como nominal e pronominal, mas está plenamente gramaticalizado. Aliás, como vocês viram pelos dados do Corpus, a gente é muito mais... O pronome agente hoje em dia é muito mais frequentemente usado do que o pronome nós. Está em toda a parte e, como eu vos disse, há até dialetos que nos dados do Corpus não apresentam qualquer realização do pronome nós, que têm sempre a gente. Eu não cheguei a referir depois, no final, porque comecei a andar mais depressa, porque achei que já estava muito em cima da hora, não voltei àqueles dados do a gente casamos-se novos, ou a gente habituaram-se, mas a minha ideia, por exemplo, para explicar esses dados é que eles surgem dentro de uma sub-área, dentro da área em que a gente tem frequência mais elevada, acima dos 85%, e o que me parece é que acontece em dialetos onde toda a série pronominal de nós e seus equivalentes não nominativos está em perda ou já se perdeu, e, portanto, isso terá tido como consequência que o reflexivo se tornou ele próprio subespecificado e já não é apenas um pronome de terceira pessoa, mas preenche outras funções, entre elas substituir o que era o primitivo nos. Portanto, eu sei que talvez do lado brasileiro há muito a ideia de que a gente é um pronome do português brasileiro e que não é tanto um pronome no português europeu, mas não é verdade, porque embora a gente não seja propriamente um pronome do português europeu standard, ainda que hoje em dia já tenha mais aceitação do que teve há uns tempos, mas é muito, muito comum no português falado, coloquial, e como viram pelos dados dialetais, em termos, nos dialetos do português está plenamente expandido e gramaticalizado.
Naquele seminário que nós nos encontramos virtualmente de Zurique, aquela tentou um trabalho sobre o agente na Ilha da Madeira, né? Não sei se você lembra, uma estudante apresentou um trabalho sobre o agente na Ilha da Madeira.
Sim. Não, esse trabalho, isso tem a ver com um tipo de estrutura que muitas vezes envolve agente, mas não só agente, são estruturas sobre as quais eu também publiquei a certa altura, mas ela depois mostrou dados muito interessantes que mostram ainda uma evolução mais avançada, e são casos em que a gente coexiste com o C impessoal, ou seja, estruturas que parecem ser de duplo sujeito, onde o C impessoal é duplicado, na maior parte dos casos por agente, mas às vezes também por nós ou por um sujeito nulo de primeira pessoa do plural. Portanto, esses são dados que eu não discuti aqui hoje.
O Jairo...
que parecem muito frequentes na Madeira, sim.
O Jairo fala muito bonito, Ana, aí pergunta. A gente criticou-os não é gramatical.
Não, a gente criticou-nos. A gente criticou-nos. Não é gramatical. Aliás, será a opção standard, na medida em que o que é gramatical é a gente criticou a gente, ou seja, a gente pode aparecer como acusativo, dativo, enfim, com todas as diferentes funções gramaticais, mas não pode aparecer como reflexivo. Portanto, a gente criticou a gente é gramatical, então a única opção nesse caso é o reflexivo nos dialetos, em que não pode ser como se... a gente... Ai, Jário, agora, de repente, a gente criticou-nos, a gente criticou-se. Não, a gente criticou-se. Então, desculpem, porque agora já estou eu própria confusa com todas as variantes dialetais. Não. Então, a gente criticou-se a nós próprios, não é? A gente criticou-se à gente. Ou até podia ser redobrado por a gente criticou-se à gente. Mas se fosse a gente criticamos, é que seria a gente criticamo-nos. A gente criticamos é um padrão perfeitamente natural para mim, porque a minha família e os meus pais são falantes de dialetos do sul de Portugal, que é uma região onde a concordância na primeira pessoa do plural é muito natural. Então, a gente criticámos-nos, sim, perfeitamente natural. A gente criticámos-se, para mim, é a gramatical. Mas com criticou é a gente criticou-se, não a gente criticou-nos.
Bom, queridos, a parte muito interessante do debate, porque sempre vai surgindo, né, uma pergunta vai trazendo outra e é muito enriquecedor. Mas a gente tem que cumprir um horário e tem que encerrar.
E agora temos de ouvir o Andrés a seguir, não é verdade?
Ana Maria, muito obrigado. Muito bom te ver de novo, compartilhando com a gente. Muito obrigado mesmo pela sua fala. É muito bom ouvir um pouquinho do que acontece do outro lado do oceano. Eu acabei de voltar, falei no chat, peguei 8 voos da TAP e aí é a chance de ouvir um pouco do que acontece em português de Portugal, que para mim é tão diferente, né? E quando a gente... e eu que estudo espanhol, né? Como eu não estudo português, então é a chance que eu tenho de aprender um pouco mais do que acontece com outra variedade da língua. Muito obrigado, Ana Maria, muito obrigado mesmo.
Muito obrigada, Carlos. E o português europeu também muda, não pensem que é só no português brasileiro que há inovações. Do lado de cá também. Muito obrigada, adorei estar aqui convosco e muitos parabéns por este encontro.
Muito obrigado. Então, já coloquei no chat o link da conferência do Andrés e a gente já vai em seguida para a fala do Andrés. Até já. Obrigada.
Tchau.